Do you know someone in foster care? Have you been in foster care? Do you have a child in foster care? Are you a grandparent or relative caring for a family member? Are you considering becoming a foster parent? Then tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. to Fresh Start Today on WNOV 860 AM to engage in thought-provoking conversations with families and providers about child welfare services, both locally and nationally. Together, we can save our children. Good afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start Today. You'll find everything you need on eharmony.com. How are you all doing this afternoon? I'm your host, Jermaine Reed, and Sean Roby is in the studio with none other than the blacksmith himself, Dr. Ramel Smith. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hey, I'm ready for this one today.
Y'all ready for this?
Get into
y'all
this one,
ready
baby.
for this? And we have the most just most skilled and delightful engineer in the place, Mr. Keon Malone, and then Tony Cash. So we just want to say good afternoon, gentlemen, to all those folks who are listening out there in Radio Land. So much is going on in this beautiful January day. Today is actually the first Wednesday of the year, and it's off to a good start. I just hate to find out that Natalie died. Lord, Natalie died, and I just been grieving ever since. And
rest in peace.
So we just want to thank Natalie for all the beautiful music that she's provided to us over the years. She definitely was a trailblazer, and it was interesting to see how her father's gifts and talents were able to be reproduced inside of her, that legacy. So we say rest well to our very loving sister, Miss Natalie Cole, and we'll play a little bit more of her stuff throughout the program. But today we are talking about a very important topic as it relates to youth in our community. So we're going to be talking about juvenile corrections and what's going on with juvenile corrections here in the state of Wisconsin, not just state of Wisconsin, but throughout the country. And we have Dr. Smith, and he was formerly a staff person.
Yes, sir.
Out at a youth correctional facility. Which one?
Yeah, I worked there too. I worked at Ethan Allen School and Southern Oaks Girls School.
In a mental health capacity?
In a mental health capacity.
Which is interesting because most youth who are detained in juvenile justice facilities have extensive histories of exposure to psychological trauma. Traumatic stress, I'm sure you agree, plays a key role in their mental health and behavioral problems and needs, and in their safety while being in these facilities. So we're going to be talking about that. We would like to discuss what happens when high-risk populations come together. And when I'm talking about high-risk population, I'm not just talking about the youth, but I'm also talking about the staff persons who are working in correctional facilities. And then what needs to happen to introduce and sustain trauma-informed care in juvenile facilities across America. So again, welcome to Fresh Start Today, and we're going to get this conversation started. I'm going to play a clip. We're going to go to a brief commercial because I'm going to play a clip from the executive director of Casey Foundation, Mr. Patrick McCarthy, and he's talking about his experience working in a juvenile correctional center. So we'll be right back after this very brief break.
I believe it is time to close every youth prison in America permanently, every single one of them, and replace them with things that work. Now, I want to tell you how I came to this belief, but I want to explain that I want to call these institutions exactly what they are. These are prisons for kids. They're often called youth development centers or youth rehabilitative centers or training schools or reformatories. But let's call them what they are. These are prisons for kids. Let me tell you a little bit about what I saw that day as I walked through the facility. I saw bright lights everywhere that I went. I saw 100 young people in a facility that had been built for 40. I saw young people wearing sweats with holes in them. I saw young people in handcuffs and shackles. I saw rows of isolation cells, and in each of those cells, I saw a young face staring out because that young person had been held in solitary confinement, sometimes for weeks. The walls of this place virtually dripped with a pervasive sense of dread and anxiety and tension and anger. And everywhere I walked in this facility, there was a sense of imminent violence. Well, I had a terrible night that night. I found myself thinking again and again, what would happen if one of my own children were being held in that place? And I thought, we've got to fix this place. We've got to make it better. And so I worked awfully hard for years. We changed leadership. We brought in new staff training. We brought in new programs. And I went all over the state talking to people about how we had to reform this institution. And I got a very interesting kind of pushback. People began to say to me, you know, Patrick, these are dangerous kids. These are predators. Nothing works with these kids. If we don't lock them up, they're going to destroy our communities. And I realized that we think about these young people and we talk about these young people in very different ways than we think and talk about our own children. We no longer see them as young people who need help to get back on track. Now, I should point out that most of the young people in this institution were black and brown. And for centuries, we have told ourselves very scary stories, and we've created ugly and threatening images about black and brown young people.
So that was Patrick McCarthy from Casey Family Services. He said some very powerful and interesting things in that very short clip. And there was a couple things the first question I want to ask you, Dr. Ramel Smith, and those who are listening out in Radio Land, if you want to join this conversation, you can call 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. The first thing I want to ask you is, are youth prisons, reformatories, youth development centers, are they working?
Well, the question is no, because if they were working, you would obviously not have as many people in them as you do. And the people that come out, they would not graduate into the adult prison system as we see, because they would be reformed and they would be the better type of citizen. The picture that the man paints is a very, very clear one. And I've seen it not on a day because I visited, but I've seen it because I lived inside of it. Because when you're working inside of these places, you literally can work 18, 19-hour days and whatnot. So when you see it, it breaks your heart, because we were kind of talking off air. When we talk about Lincoln Hill School, Ethan Allen, Southern Oaks Girls School, now Copper Lake, they are prisons, and it's what we call a Type 1 institution. Type 2 institution is sort of like a St. Charles or St. Emilian's for people familiar with that in the Milwaukee southeastern area. These are still places, residential treatments, but they're a little bit even more homelier in the field there. When you talk about a Type 1 institution, the Ethan Allen, now Lincoln Hills, these are prisons. You see the razor wires. You see young people, what he talked about, not only in shackles and handcuffs. It's a lot of negative things that go in there. Before I continue, let me say this. There are some good things that go in there. When they call those names, you get a lot of young people. They can get their HSED, and they do have solid education programs in there. They have different programs to help rehabilitate as it relates to alcohol and drug abuse, because some of them have those issues already, have different things to help them with cognitive development, making better choices and decisions, things of that nature for those who might have been sexually abused, to be able to deal with. As I said, I worked as a psychologist, so you have one-on-one counseling. And sadly, some of our kids do get better medical treatment when they're inside of there. They get dental care for the first time, things of that nature. They get to see an optometrist, get glasses if they need it, certain things that some don't get. But I think that's a bigger saying on our society, that they have to be incarcerated to get some of those basic needs in life. Right. But like I said, so it is some good things in there. You have some people who care, some people who do things, but it comes down to this question. If I need $100 and you can only give me 20, as big as your heart is, I'm still short on what I need, and that's what these institutions are. They don't give these young kids everything that they need. When we think about children specifically who have been in there, you stated it. You said these are kids who have gone through, we talk about this on the program all the time, the ACE, adverse childhood experience. Kids who've been physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally neglected, physically beaten, went through tremendous household dysfunction. So we take that kid and then we put them in an institution that's just as dysfunctional. That could be even more dysfunctional, where now you're away from the people who you love. And you think about this time we just talked about. We just shared a great Christmas time, season holiday. What about those kids? What about those families that's away? Back in the day, if you're like at St. Charles or if you're St. Emilian's, you can have regular family visits. You can have weekend furloughs, things to keep you attached. But when you're in a Type 1 institution, you're locked away. You can get maybe a visit once every 2 weeks. Phone calls are limited. And even the phone call system, everybody know about the atrocious things that happen with the billing system, with the prison, and phone calls being able to reconnect families. And when we look about, you say, why should they be closed? Because prisons are, or correctional institutions, whatever we want to call them, are to rehabilitate. So once you're reintegrated back into society, you could be a full-fledged citizen. Everything is good. Well, the number one factor when we talk about reintegration is family support. So when you take away the family, you take away that support system. Even if the family has some dysfunction, we still, if we have that love, we have that support where they can come, then you have a base. And I got a little guy named Dante. I won't go with his name. He's a grown man now. Went to Lincoln Hills. Got his HSED. Wasn't in for any violent crimes. Stole a car. Been homeless the last 3 years. So we asked if this young man had went there, did his time, was rehabilitated. Why is he still never committed another crime, not on paper or anything now, but has a difficult time finding a job, has a difficult time just with the basic things in life that we take for granted. And if our institutions were really working, we wouldn't have this, because Dante is not a singular case. He's just a microcosm of the problem above. And I think we'll talk about some of the other bigger, larger problems we have inside of these institutions that make them even worse for our students or our young people.
So I was looking at something that the National Child Traumatic Stress Network,
NCTS,
that they had noted or documented, saying that the removal of a child from a home, even for a brief period of time, is itself a traumatic event. So just being incarcerated or going to detention center, and in addition, they also recognize that that being placed in a non-secure placement, which is a type 2, which you talked about, residential care center. Then you have group home settings. That being placed in these environments in many ways is just as traumatic to youth as being held in a locked facility, and that there should be alternative detention that they need to be developed. So what is your thoughts about that in terms of can being a child or youth being placed, because we're talking about where do we place these children who have committed certain types of crimes? Where do they belong? Where do they fit in? That's kind of like what Patrick McCarthy was talking about too, these messages that we have sent. And then also what should really be of great concern to this community. I was looking at, and I want you to answer that question, but I was looking at the Division of Juvenile Corrections 2014 annual report, which is their most recent report. And the children who are out at Lincoln Hills, 68% of those children are black children. 26.7% are who? White. And Latinos make up 4.2%. 2013, 69% of that population were black, compared to 26% Caucasian and 5% white. 2012 was 73% black. So when we look at that, I'm sure some of those youths, like Dante, I would assume were low offense crimes. I mean, I just can't imagine that all of those kids out there have committed murder or have raped someone or whatever. But where do they fit in society? Where do we treat them? Where do we service them? Where's the best place for our children?
Okay, so I mean, let's go back to the real criminal.
Okay.
The real criminal is not these children. They're put in a bad system. It's our society at large that creates the environment that breeds this type of behavior.
Okay.
So when we look at that, it's like you put a person in a difficult situation, and let's just use something that's kind of known to everybody. When Hurricane Katrina came, and our brothers and sisters in Louisiana was trying to get fined for, what did they call them? Called them refugees. They called them thugs. They said, look at these people breaking it. They were in survival mode. There's nothing thuggish about that. It was survival mode. And we don't want to look at it like this, but a lot of our children are in survival mode because of a lot of the trauma that they had. Now, that's not to discount the behavior that they exhibited, and that behavior needs to stop. So the real question is, what do we need to do? Well, if they've been traumatized and we know they've come from dysfunctional settings, putting them in another setting is not going to help. I very rarely read off of anything, but I want to read this definition of trauma-informed care. And we talk about we're trauma-informed. It says trauma-informed care is an organizational structure that involves understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all types of trauma.
Okay.
Not punishing, but responding, understanding. So let's get real with Wisconsin right now. You say, well, where should we put these? Well, we don't have any mental health institutions. We don't have any real drug rehabilitation places where most of these people really need to go, where you say we can create a more relaxed environment. We can create a more humane environment that really is conducive for positive change to help these individuals. Once we put them inside of a prison system, and let's look at what Wisconsin did. What happened in 2011? Governor Walker said, you know what, our numbers are going down in juvenile corrections facilities, so let's consolidate these three into one. So who has a problem with that? Our numbers are going down. That's a good thing. So we have an institution in Union Grove, Southern Oaks Girls School, where we used to have about 89 girls. I think it was about 12 girls there at the time. Then you had Ethan Allen, which is in Wells, Wisconsin, which is it was midway between Milwaukee and Madison. Okay. And when we look at these numbers, we see that the bulk of the population are black and brown children. Now, the third institution is in Irma, Wisconsin. Now, we know the demographics of the state of Wisconsin.
Where in the world is Irma?
That's near Wausau.
I thought that was my cousin, Irma. You talking about?
and when you go up north like that, there's few of us. So think about it. They had a chance to say, we're going to consolidate. So what would be the most logical place to put these children? Now, if we understand the impact of family, the importance of family, why would we move all of these children, especially these children of color, way up north? Now, think about this. Ethan Allen was the longest institution that had been around. So you said, well, why not go to Lincoln Hills? Maybe they were newer. They had just did a multi-million-dollar investment at Ethan Allen in 2008 and 2009. There was 94 jobs created by these new jobs in Irma. So you had to ask yourself, what was more important, getting new jobs in a rural community or helping these juveniles be in a setting that could go? Because you say, well, what's the difference if they're in Ethan Allen or if they're in Lincoln Hills? Well, one, the staff that you had at Ethan Allen, it was more representative of the population of the young men and the young women that was at those places. You take them up to Irma, Wisconsin, where a lot of the people have not seen black people, have not seen people of color. The only real recollection or understanding they have is what they've seen by the propaganda of the media and television and the other stereotypes that's perpetuated throughout our society, which are mostly negative. So now you have these people who are looking. Now, if you put 15 white people in the room and you put one black person, it changes the dynamic completely. Okay. So now when you're at Ethan Allen, if you have a more mixed and diversified staff, it's going to reduce the ability for people to do things with a kind of like a blank check. Say we could do whatever because there's no checks and balances. There's nobody who's going to squeal or snitch. We can have a blue code here. But when you have a diverse staff where you have people who are looking out, and let me get this straight, it's not just the black staff, because I work with white staff that were culturally competent and they were very good in looking out. But when you take it to a community that's not as culturally competent, that's not there, you're asking for trouble. So now let's look at this. Now we have an investigation. It's basically like the feds raided the place. Right. Because they said there's something going on. Why is that? Because people were saying we're supposed to abuse. Now, in any type of healthcare facility, the number one rule is above else, do no more harm.
Well, correct. Now, let's look at the mission of the Department of Juvenile Corrections, which is the Department of Corrections' mission is to, one, protect the public, our staff, and those in our charge, provide opportunities for positive change and success, promote, inform, and educate others about our programs and successes, partner and collaborate with community service providers and other criminal justice entities. Enacting the principles laid out in the department's vision and mission will allow for a juvenile justice system that balances protection of the community, youth accountability, and competency building for responsible and productive community living. You looking at me real strange.
Yeah, because it sounds slick.
It sounds good on paper, though. When you read it, say like they got it together. So what happened between this and folks' feet being practically cut off, toes amputated, and
all
sexual
men are
assault?
Equal.
All men? No, where? Where?
I'm saying if our Constitution presents this lie, what makes us think that any other institution that's built from this country would hold to what they're saying there? And justice is sound. I mean, in theory, it sounds good on paper, but as Sean was saying, as we move from theory to practice, we clearly don't see this. When you have kids, now this is the thing. So let's say you have a kid who's been traumatized, away from home, in a new place, and you tell him to do something, he doesn't listen. You know what they do? This is what they do. They SWAT up on you. And it's 5 adults on one kid. So what you gonna do? You from the hood? You thinking, oh, y'all trying to come up on me? You gonna bum rush me?
Now my natural instinct kicks back in.
I'm coming out at you. I already got this anger. I need to let it go.
Whether
But
it's a badge, a uniform, or whatnot.
I physically can't win. But so no.
So I wonder what
So
is
listen, what happens though after this? So now you bum rush the kid and you do it under the thing that they're not applying, they're not complying. This is within the confines of our rules that we can put on combat gear. We've seen it with the military state of police that we have here with peaceful protesters. We saw it at the Mall of America not too long ago. But now you bum rush this kid, and then after you subdued him and you've drugged him, you know what you do? You strip him of all of his clothes, you put him on a little matted gown, and you put him in a cement room by himself and tell him he's in the hole, he's on lockdown until he learns how to act. Now, is that going to increase the situation or decrease the situation as far as that behavior acting again?
You've just added to my trauma.
You've added to the trauma and what
It's
you've
compound,
done.
yeah.
And so we talk about all of those things in the mission. I'm all about protecting staff. I'm all about protecting the other inmates. I'm all about protecting the community. But we create situations that make things
But
worse.
you know, I often say, Dr. Smith, people say the child welfare system is broken. The correction system is broken. My position or my theory is this is not broken, it's designed. And whatever you design, whatever system you design, whatever you put in, that's going to determine what your output looks like, your outcomes.
Well, we wanted to create jobs, so what?
Right. So I think we have to get away from this thing about systems being broken and kind of look at, when you look at black
they're
and
working
brown
exactly
children.
the way they were designed to work.
And
Yeah,
we
Broke on
also have to
purpose.
see that there is a correlation and a direct link between what happens in child welfare and what's going on in juvenile and adult correction. Those two systems are like conjoined twins at the hip, and we can't really see them as two separate entities. They're pretty much one and the same to some degree. So, so I wanted to say that because we're talking on Fresh Start today what it means to be a trauma-informed juvenile justice system with Dr. Ramel Smith and Sean Roby. I'm your host, Jermaine Reed. And you can join this conversation by calling 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. So, Dr. Smith, I'm thinking about, you're talking about taking children from one community, transporting them 100 miles away, 200 miles away from their culture, their environment, their community, the things that's familiar to them. So if I'm hearing you correct, you said that causes some sense of psychological stress and trauma. It's the same thing that happens with little black children who are removed from Milwaukee County and placed way out here in Brown County somewhere, and the only thing that's black look like horses and cows, and that creates some sense of what?
I mean, how is that different from the slave trade? When a mother had her son, ripped from her arms and taken to a different place. You say, what kind of trauma does that create? You take a kid out of his mama hand and put him in his grandmama house.
Right.
He's still upset because he wants his mama.
It's a traumatic. Yes.
And that's in a loving environment. So you go to
Can you
a foster
imagine?
care,
There you go.
or you go to a type 2 or type 1 institution where maybe the people don't care. And when I worked in a type 2, I worked at St. Charles also. And you know what? Most of the people, that was their second job. So you know what? You could be tired. You don't want to deal with that. And I know good staff to have bad days. Oh, you don't want to listen? Well, I'm going to show you who the boss is tonight. And so what we do is we feed into it. So we're saying, what does this do? Any type of separation, is going to add to the problem. So, if we were really going to do this the correct way, and this goes back into the audio that we played earlier in the segment, in the program, it's about if we're really looking for, why not create institutions that really are designed for their specific issues? Even if it's somewhat criminal in nature, you say, okay, this was a criminal behavior, but what's the real root? What's the real cause? Let's get to the underlying cause, because if we can fix that, then we fix all of the other issues.
And I think that's so critical because you have so many younger kids, whether they're 10, now being moved into adult courts and whatnot because of some of these heinous acts that they're committing. But even at a foster home, when you move one kid from their natural setting and then they go into a foster home, and granted it may be a lot different from home, that's still trauma. That still can commit or develop a certain level of chaos.
Because you could go to a foster home that's, from an ideal outside, say, this is a great home. It's a two-parent home. We got food every day and whatnot like that. But if I'm not with mama,
You're not my mama.
It's still dysfunctional to me. It's still
Gotcha.
traumatizing to me. So, and that's a shout out to a lot of the treatment and foster care parents who say, you know what, we're doing everything. We're giving you a good
Right.
environment. You know, don't take that personal when sometimes they react in a manner because it's not what you're doing is not good. It's just it's not what they want. And as a kid who maybe can't express themselves
Yes.
in an intellectual manner as we can as adults, that behavior comes out in a different way. And you know, we talk about this from time to time. Kwabanan Muhib put out the calendar every year. You know, the children are
children are
crying,
dying. Yep.
are crying, and when they cry, they talk about well, these big kids aren't crying with tears, but they're crying in other manners, and that's the thing. And what we have to do is to understand that these aberrant behaviors are not so much criminalistic tendencies from this super predator that they try to predict and try to
Yes.
create in the media, but from a hurt and broken child. We talk
Okay.
about that.
We got to get this call. Caller, you on Fresh Start today. You have a brief question or comment as it relates to this topic?
Yes, I just wanted to know Dr. Smith's contact information.
Okay, we'll
there
get your
any?
we'll get your name offline and give you the phone number.
Okay.
Thank you for calling Fresh Start today. Now, Dr. Smith.
Let me go to this
Sure.
before we went because we talk about foster care, and I know you're intimately knowledgeable of Antoine Fisher.
All right.
And then so in the movie, here's a grown man. He's in the Navy, you know, he's got everything together. And he writes this poem, you know, who will cry for the little boy, talking about these inner pains that's still deep down in the little boy.
Yes.
And what was the thing that finally found him some type of solace? Meeting his mama.
Wow.
He was a grown man. And after he met her, he was like, you know what it is with that. But I needed to have that closure.
That
Think
young-
about how
yes.
many kids don't have that type of closure. And if they don't get the help from a Dr. Davenport or from a Jermaine Reed, you know, from a Sean Roby, what kind of frustration and pain that builds up into them. So a lot of the times we see these behaviors is really a cry for help. And if we don't address the cry and we just address the behavior, we do them a great disservice. But it's like you said, that could be a part of the bigger plan in the hand of the institutions.
So the National Child Traumatic Stress Network also said that those who work in juvenile facilities know only too well that youth with mental health issues, including a history of trauma, emotionally deteriorate while in custody, and their condition often worsens. Incarceration also makes it more difficult to address past trauma. And as we have seen, many youth arrive at the front door with significant trauma-related challenges. Detention centers are not designed for treatment. What are juvenile correctional facilities or prisons designed for, Dr. Smith?
I mean, it depends on if you want the real answer.
I want to realize because we real talk here.
It's designed to keep breeding criminals. It's
My
designed to keep
God.
them there. Okay, I'm gonna give you two words. Martha Stewart.
See,
Now think about where she went to prison. Where did she go to prison?
wasn't
It was
Yeah.
it was luxury. It was rehab. You know, it was exactly where it needed to be. She didn't come out where she couldn't maintain and reintegrate back into society.
Where do you think they go sell Bill? They send him somewhere.
Oh man, I don't even want to talk about that. Man.
Because you know it's gonna be a little
that's the
different.
thing. But this is the whole thing. If you look at prisons in other places, in China and other developed nations, in Australia and different places like this, Google them up. Look at them.
Yeah.
They do look like country clubs. Remember, it was the kid, the rich kid.
Affluenza?
Affluenza. Thank you. I couldn't come up with the term. And they was like, he you know, he's a product of his environment. He doesn't know consequences. So you know where they sent him? To the best of the best place where he had equestrian therapy.
Wow.
That's riding horses.
Yeah.
And you know what? I ain't mad at that because I think that is good to help. Now, this kid is the person who really needed to be in a thing where he needed to be held back and learn the truth. But I'm saying it's like, why can't we have these type of activities for Lil Johnny, for Jamal,
right.
for Abdullah,
For Lil
all of
Jermaine.
these places, you know, as far as that, because when you go to Ethan Island, like I said, or Lincoln Hills,
Is it
you'll
therapeutic?
see some nice places there. I used to walk the grounds with some of my boys where we would just walk and talk. And it was beautiful. It was 216 acres of greenery. They used to have a roasting, but you know what you always see is that razor wire. And it's always a constant reminder. So it's like, no matter how good it is, it's always, but you in prison.
You only
know
can
it's
go
there.
so far.
And it's like, why can't we put those type of images of what we want them to have? It's what we're doing with conditioning. We condition them. You talk about juvenile detentions. Well, let's go back to the original juvenile detentions, and I call those the public school systems, because that's what we do when we put our kids in detention, when we put our kids in in-house suspension.
So we're conditioning.
We're getting them
them
ready to
There you
be
go.
away.
Wow.
What is prison? We remove you
That's right.
for punishment. So what is detention? We remove you from your fellow
Wait a minute.
classmates. We remove
What is
you.
foster care? You remove. Everything is based on removal.
And if all of the data in the literature tells us when we remove, it causes emotional deterioration, it causes them to regress, it causes them to be in a worse place, why do we continue to do it?
Yes.
Wow.
I mean,
we better take a break because we're gonna have to talk about some solutions. Because we can go all day talk about what's broken, but there's got to be a way to fix this. And we'll be right back. Fresh Start Today.
Do you know what Nelson Mandela, Andrew Jackson, Malcolm X, and Steve Jobs have in common? Each of these individuals were world leaders who were once in foster care. We often hear about the road from foster care to prison, but did you know there's another road from foster care to a world stage? Fresh Start Family Services is looking for adults to become licensed foster parents. Every child needs a caring adult in their lives. Wouldn't it be great if you could foster or adopt the next world leader? For more information on how you can become licensed with Fresh Start, please call 414-351-1100. That is 351-1100.
All right, you're listening to Fresh Start Today. If you want to join this conversation with Dr. Ramel Smith, Jermaine Reed, and Sean Roby, you can call 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. We just missed a call. If you give us a call back, that would be greatly appreciated. Now, Dr. Smith, you said something off air beside the fact that your mama used to call you Mr. Melody, but you said something in response to the statement I made about removal, and you're talking about removing children and placing them into different communities, into the systems and whatever, and I talk about child welfare, so on and thus forth. First of all, I want to say there comes a time when children need to be removed, in place in alternative settings, but how their family members are engaged and integrated into those societies is really important. And sometimes when folks go visit their loved ones who are incarcerated or in detention, sometimes they're treated like they are criminals and that they have done something wrong. So I think in terms of creating a trauma-informed community, a community that's responsive and corrections, that they really need to look at how they engage family members. Now, let's talk about solutions, because we've already illuminated the problems. We can go on and on and on and talk about how Lincoln Hills proposed that they are a trauma-informed care community. Child welfare is across this community, all across the country. The various bureaus, they say they are trauma-informed communities, but yet folks are re-traumatized while being in those systems. What can we do in-house on a very community basis, on an individual basis, to address the needs of these youth who may fall into this category?
Yeah, I mean, it's a three-pronged attack you can do. Obviously, if we're going to just talk about, if we want to talk about what we can do, it's some things we can do within the system. But if we're just saying, hey, we already understand the system might not be forced, what are some things we can do? Let's look at groups like Micah. I think they're doing some great initiatives. They go inside of the prison, and what they do is say, you know what, we're going to find out what's going on here, and say, you know what, since you won't let people come in, what we're going to do. One of the things they did that I thought was just awesome is they were able to allow the men to read books and videotape them and to get those to their kids.
Right.
And people say, well, what is that? How is that big? That's awesome. That's humongous for a child.
DCF also has a project like that. Department. I think it was correction. Yeah.
And because we talk about how important it is for children to read. But then we talk about the interaction with the parents. So if a parent is a way, but this is a way in which I can talk and I can engage, even though it's not the ideal way, it's one way. But how did this happen? Because a civic-minded, community-minded group that's multi-generational, multicultural in nature, saying, hey, let's get together and see what we can do when we bring our collective voice together. So when we talk about little community initiative, it's a great, great thing. Another thing what we can do is like what Rashad Washington Jr. is doing over at ProTrade.
Okay, what is he doing?
Okay, so with ProTrade, you have something that's called Agents of Change. A lot of the young men and women that come out of prison, come out of correctional institutions, what's the biggest thing that causes for recidivation? Because I don't have a job. I don't have that connection. My family is not there for me because they don't know if I'm going to really be, doing what I'm supposed to. Maybe I'm being a little bit more of a burden on them than I want to. But when they see you doing something positive, and so the thing is, when most of these men and women get out, they do have an energy. They do have a fire. Say, I want to do something, but it's not them waiting. So over at ProTrade, he had something called 100 plus 100 equals 1. And so what he's talking about is how do we get these young men and women, get them some viable skills that they can have. So they're taught how to do different carpentry skills, plumbing skills, painting skills, these functional skills on construction jobs. give them a definite skill so they have it, but then pair them up with jobs. And he's been doing this all across Milwaukee. I had a chance to go over there and speak with these young men, and I'm telling you, it was just like one of the most amazing things that you can see. He set it up, right inside of the hood, and when you do that, now what you do is you have a place where you can bring somebody. So like I told you about the young man Dante, that's a place where I'm introducing him into to say, hey, listen, this is a place where you have some skills, you have the want, you have the know-how. Here's a place that's helping you. So what can we do then? I'm not talking about literally adopting them where they have to come into your home, but I'm talking about becoming a pen pal, being able to give this person positive information inside of their mind, trying to give them some help so it's a resource to have. So when we start talking about what can we do, these are just like vivid examples of what's being done right now. So you say, I don't know what I could do. You can connect with these organizations, or you know what you can do? You can become an army of one. Okay. And start in that individual basis. You call a prison and say, hey, I want to do this. And the great thing about it is once we get so many armies of ones and we collectively get them together, there's so many wonderful things that we can do.
All right. Well, I do know that Senator Lena Taylor is coordinating an effort to transport some relatives, meaning parents and siblings of youth who are incarcerated, to Lincoln Hills. And so if folks want to know more information, what I want you to do is contact I call her sister. She is a senator. She is Sister Senator Lena Taylor about that initiative. And there's a lady by the name of Donna there. And I'm going to get that phone number for you before we go.
Well, we have two phone numbers here.
The Milwaukee number,
414-342-7126. 342-7126. And before the show is over, we'll try to get another number for you as well.
All right. And so let's talk.
So can we just rewind?
Yeah, sure.
Because we're talking about Sister Lena Taylor. Well, she was on the news not too long ago. Why? Because of what happened to her son. Mm-hmm. And so when we start talking about like all of these different injustices that happen, every time we get upset and we do nothing, it allows it to happen. But what I appreciated about the senator is when it happened to her son, as far as being stopped aggressively by the police, questioning over something that appeared not to need questioning over, she went to the news. She went to the media. She used every outlet that she had to illuminate the problem and situation. So many times, working in the NBA, people always say, why don't your players do this? Why don't they do this? They was like, why don't LeBron James sit out for the Tamir Rice thing and whatnot like that? And I say, hey, you know what? Maybe these guys could do more. That's up on them. But then you ask yourself, well, what are you doing? What are you willing to risk? What are you willing to give up?
Right.
And it's easy to say what somebody else should do because maybe they have a different financial power. But what we don't understand is, I'm not advocating violence or anything like this, but this is what's going to eventually happen. Once you get people frustrated, and I say this really to the government, think about what happened in Paris. Man, there's 8 people that shut down the city because they decided to strap themselves up and say, hey, you know what? Let's do this for real then.
Right.
Think about how many hurt people we have inside our communities. So it behooves, the government to listen and to stop oppressing people, but also for the people who feel oppressed, for the people who feel marginalized and set aside, but do have some type of currency, do have some type of initiative, does have some type of means. It's up to us to go out and do some things.
And there's a couple things that we're going to have. But Dr. Ramel Smith, he has so much rich information to share, and that's why we love having him on. I was glad when he called me yesterday that he was available. But again, the district phone number for Senator Taylor's office is 414-342-7176. Please give Donna a call. They're at 414-342-7176. I know they have limited space, but if you have a loved one who's out in Lincoln Hills and you want to go out and connect with them, please give Donna a call at 414-342-7176. Now, we have a caller. Caller, do you have a brief question or comment as it relates to this topic?
I have a comment.
Oh, yes.
This is Wanda Montgomery.
The infamous Queen Mother Wanda Montgomery. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What's on your mind?
I just wanted to call and say, this certainly is a topic that we need to continue to discuss. But one of the things that concerns me is sometimes when our youth get in trouble and they're taken away from the community. As families, we really need to look at, and I don't know, there may be some resources out there. How do we support that family while that child is away? Because the child that's coming back may not be the same child that went away. And so how do we really help them with the resources that they're going to need to be able to help that child transitions, not only in the community, but back in your house? You know, because they may have experienced some things that, you know, they don't want to talk about.
Right.
But it did happen. And so what resources are available so that we can do as a community and not look at them as, you know, they did this bad? Because if you really think about it, we've all had some issues.
Right.
But somebody was there to help us to transition, to move past that and don't hold it against us for the rest of our lives.
All right.
So that's my comment.
Thanks a lot. A very great comment. And let me just respond to a part of that before Dr. Smith chimes in. I loved how Wanda said the child that leaves is often not the same child that returns. And that does not just hold true for corrections, but that also happens in child welfare. And
Absolutely.
when that child returns and they're a different person, sometimes it's hard for the parent to manage that new child. And then we find out that child re-enters into a system. And what we'll call it in corrections is recidivism. Yeah. So how do we support families? I know there are church ministries, you know, but are there any other resources in the community where we can wrap around these birth families to help them?
Well, Wanda makes a great point, and all of the recidivation research, all of the things they do in prison, you know where they got their base from? Was from families and militaries. Because kids that left at 18 and 19 and went into the military, that went to Vietnam, that went to Iraq, when they came back to their families, they were not the same. Mm-hmm. You see the VA structures that we have built up, all of these other different things, they're not treated as much as criminal. Those are the type of structures that we need to start to have. We need to go back to the literature from the military and see how they help those families, how they help the community around them to have those different types of support, because that's really what it's based upon. Because the absolute truth is the person that returns is not the same person, and that becomes frustrating, especially for a parent, because you say, I'm supposed to be responsible for this child. You take them away. This ain't what I did. Now you want me to clean up a mess that you made. It's a difficult thing, because just like some of those the people in the military, once you've taken a turn, it's hard to turn back. And she was being nice about it, but you a boy and you go up in there and you get invaded anally, you're not coming back the same. Let's just be real.
And that brings me to this point about the Prison Rape Elimination Act, that a federal law that was created, and Wisconsin, of course, have to abide by it. But because the sexual abuse of children was so high, you know, between peers, but also staff. I mean, when you read what's in the paper with Lincoln Hills, I mean, that's case in point. You know, the staff person, 23 years old, who allegedly had sex with the 15-year-old. This stuff happens, and so. But
see, they've known about that. And in the Wisconsin Department of Correction, they have something called Executive Directive 16A, which means if you get caught having any type of inappropriate sexual relations with anybody, whether it's consensual, whether it's statutory or whatnot, you can get up to 40 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. But it still happens.
How many weeks she get in prison?
No, they're not, and that's the whole thing. We talk about, you look at the mission statements for the juvenile corrections. You look at it for Lincoln Hills, and let's talk about that. They said, you know what, we want these people to be held accountable. Well, who's holding the people that's protecting our kids accountable? You had people retire when the investigation came. What kind of punishment is that? Why aren't they giving criminal time? Why isn't it more? And so that goes back into understanding that the system is not fair. It's not built for us. And if we continue to play the game on a fair basis or on their way, we're always going to lose because it's stacked against us.
Now, we got a few minutes, and this really is a child welfare, and not just from a system standpoint, but from a community standpoint, we like to address issues that we can relate to. I have to say this, because I'm going to want you to define what trauma is, but the new DCF annual report came out, the most recent one, which is dated 2014. I want to share those numbers with you. You all have heard the commercial I talked about 67% of the children who are in foster care on December the 31st, 2013, that 67% were African Americans. Well, I'm sad to report that number had increased in 2014, just slightly, to 68.2%. So on that particular day, there was 1,553 African-American children 589 Caucasian children, which represented 25.9%, which was a little lower for Caucasian 2013. I don't have the numbers for the Latino, but in 2014, 12.3% were Latino. And again, that's a single point in time. That's how many
But
children.
coincidentally, aren't those the same percentages that's in prison?
To prison, yep.
See, I keep telling people there's a connection between child
I think we got a
welfare
caller.
and correction. But we have a caller. Caller, you're on Fresh Start Today. You have a brief question or comment?
Yeah, I just noticed that in the zip code they said 53206, 90% of the children are born to single mothers. That's kind of a connection. And I come from kind of a broken home in a way myself.
Well, you know what? I don't know where that stat came from, but one thing I can say is that there has been some social engineering that has gone on to remove fathers from their homes, and we can go back to chattel slavery all the way to the 60s, right, even up to the present when we look at incarceration rates, and inequality and discriminatory practice when it comes down to incarcerating black males, and then felony distribution. Now you can't get a job, you can't vote. So it's always been this effort in public policy and practice to remove the African American male from his family.
But
Dr.
let me
Smith.
even do that, because that's a myth in itself. Whenever you talk about what's best, they say what's best is a happy two-parent household. Then what's next best is a happy single family, whether it's mom or dad.
Mm-hmm.
The next is an unhappy single, but the absolute worst place for a child is a two-parent household that's unhappy. So if you have a mom and dad that's living together, we just here together for the kids, but it's all dysfunctional. That's even worse. So, a lot of times people say it's a single-parent thing. It's not just that. Is it good to have two people? Yes. But in all honesty, we come from a community of a village where the village raises the children, so it should never just be those
collectivism.
two. So when we say that, I mean, let's keep it with a grain of salt, too.
You know what? I think real quickly to go back to those statistics Jermaine mentioned about now it's 68%. We have to keep in mind it sounds like a small number, but the reality is with our climate, with the overall global climate change, and 1 degree is melting ice caps, which is raising water levels, which is changing the weather. While we, on Christmas this year, we had no snow, and 72 hours later, it was a massive snowstorm. So we got to think about all those things because it's a major difference.
And I appreciate that, both Dr. Smith and Dr. Roby. But let me say something here as it relates to statistics and numbers. Let's just deal with these child welfare numbers. If there was about 2,100 kids who are in the system in Milwaukee County, approximately, and 1,500 of them are black children. Not all 1,500 of those kids are supposed to be in the system. If we could have wrapped some services around those families,
preventative measures, yes,
and not re-traumatize,
yes,
then those children would have a greater chance of thriving and doing better. 500 and our abuse levels and neglect levels. I mean, black folk ain't abusing their kids more than white and Latinos and Asian. And,
absolutely.
So we need to address how come things are happening the way they are. And it's not to excuse that we don't take some responsibility for it, but surely 68% of the folk in child welfare representing, black folk representing child welfare population on December 31st, 2014. Something's wrong with that picture. Thank you for tuning in to Fresh Start today. It's been great. We'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about preserving sibling relationships in foster care with a very special guest. Ms. King will be with us. So tune back in. Be safe. Be well. Until we talk again.